Welcome to Haunted Hills Podcast. I'm Tegan Dawson, the Ghost Whisperer. This episode shares the ghost stories from Traralgon. It's a small town, not a ghost town. Firstly, the reason these stories are important to me is that ghosts were people once. It's fascinating to learn about how they lived and what they did. Their presence gives us a glimpse into the lives of regular people of these towns. You don't have to believe in ghosts to enjoy the narrative. Not all spectres are fearsome and angry. Some want to communicate. After all, they were people. It's not as though death steals our humanity. Usually, the circumstances of our life or our choices we make do that. And that's a different kind of story that haunts me. It's a surprise to most residents to hear of ghosts in Traralgon. However, it is an old town with a rich history we have explored that has left a residue. Listen to discover the secrets that hide in the back alleys of Traralgon. This town is filled with haunts, not only of those of people, but the work of builders and architects, whose work was removed without a trace. There are definitely haunted places in Traralgon. The Traralgon Ghost Tour used to start at Newman Park, and if you want to explore the ghosts of Traralgon, it's a great place to start. Cutting through the car park at the Traralgon Scout Hall, just past it on the walking path, near the lantern post that used to look like it was plucked straight from Narnia. It's since been modernised and provides much better light. Anyway, there in a tree nearby was an apparition forming, a red misting presence hanging in the tree. From 1842 until 1963, the death penalty in Victoria was carried out by hanging. A few people from the Traralgon Shire were sentenced to hang until dead, however their sentences were commuted, although death sentences were carried out in the Melbourne or Pentridge jails. During the same period, the traditional custodians of the land were not often reported about. While most of the accounts are that they were shot, it would not be out of the realms of possibility someone was hung. This is because until 1967, Australia did not consider Aboriginal people as people, listing them under flora and fauna. This even meant they did not receive birth certificates. The person hung here may be wanting justice or acknowledgement, although the list of people it is could be enormous. Maybe this story was not publicly recorded due to the feelings of the time, whether it was an Aboriginal person or a completion of suicide, which is why the presence is revealing itself. Hopefully telling their story will satisfy them and allow them to move on, or at least become less angry, with some form of acknowledgement. A little further on from here is a creek. Traralgon is named after the local indigenous words, Tara meaning river and Alagon meaning little fish. This is the name of the stream, Traralgon Creek, although a better name for it is Tragic Creek. So many tragedies. An old article says we don't like ghost stories, nor hanging out and discovering about drains, which may be referring to the creek and other drains put in to stop flooding and outbreaks of cholera. At the Traralgon Creek, covered in spirits, there's a sadness here in photos taken. Orbs cover the grass and act as ghostly baubles in the tree. In the early days, the creek was lined with ferns and deep holes, even before getting to the treacherously steep creek banks. In 1881, the Traralgon Creek rose 5 feet in 10 minutes, shocking the locals, making them flee, even putting the railway underwater. Flooding the town rarely claimed lives, as the locals knew to be wary of a flooded creek, but the stream itself claimed many. Once a jolly swagman camped by the Traralgon Creek for 3 days with Arthur. At dinner time, Arthur noticed his fellow swagman hadn't returned to the camp. He called the police, who searched, making a macabre discovery, finding the swagman face down in the water. On the bank was a patch of dirt, bottom-sized. This led investigators to believe he'd been sitting on the bank and fell asleep, rolling forward into the creek. He may very well still be here, frustrated that his story ended as a result of a nap and falling headfirst into the water. An unemployed man stopped by here for a drink. He lost his footing, fell in and snagged himself on branches and debris in the creek. The creek and surrounding rivers were cleaned up by the councils in 1939 to stop severe floods. Another poor fellow spent 2 weeks in the river before he was discovered. As he had rusty coins on him when found, the police ruled out robbery. Like I said, there are many spirits and many who would have reason to want to stay. On a ghost tour, 2 men stayed on the bridge over the Traralgon Creek taking photos of the river. The tour group had left the bridge. There they felt someone walk past them. The bridge has a concrete base. However, still shudders as people pass by, if it is not filled with people. No one had walked past them that we could see, and unfortunately, to get a photo of the phantom with them. The souls in the creek are numerous and could be anyone with a number of stories to tell, or maybe it's the spirit of the stream. It's trying to tell the stories. The next story is of the infamous ghost sighting at Drains Lane, Traralgon. Drains Lane is out towards Glengarry. It's a site a ghostly apparition appeared one night. A couple driving home one night wanted to prolong the evening. Oh la la. They turned down boggy Drains Lane. No sooner had they stopped the car, a man flew over the bonnet. At first, they thought it was a mixture of fog and their parents' presence in the back of their minds. They stared out the windscreen for a minute, when the man appeared again. He stood staring at them, directly in front of the headlights. He wore black, and something of a bowler's hat, and a long coat. His hands were pressed against his chest, as though they were stuck there, and he couldn't use them properly. Kind of like he was doing push-ups, but lost the strength to extend his arms. His legs were bent and misshapen as well. The occupants felt afraid, as though bad oil resonated from the disfigured apparition. He started to move into the fog outside of their lights. They later discovered this was a reedy dam. The driver slammed the car into reverse, stamped on the accelerator, and in a hail of mud they reversed out of there. Although every year, the couple return and wait by the road for the man to appear again. It's likely they saw a railman who was killed by the Stratford train, and that is why he is seen going off towards the gatehouse that night. He wanders the train line, dazed and confused, looking for people, his fellow colleagues, his family, although they've all moved on. Unfortunately, the iron horses of the 20th century stopped for no man, woman or child. In the town, the railway was like the river itself, also claiming lives. Quite a few have been lost there. This results in orbs and ghostly forms all over the railway. The historic Green Weatherboard train station, which is still standing on the opposite side of the tracks, opposite the main street, which has always been Franklin Street, to the town, which in the early days there was no overpass, as there is today. This tragedy resulted in 3 lives lost, a station master who died, and circumstances that don't readily release unto a peaceful rest, even if desired. As part of the investigation, he felt the weight of obligation too heavily, even though not only his decision and his sole responsibility. Eli and a 4-year-old were beginning a journey to Melbourne. The train was already running at the station house awaiting the passengers. Holding hands, they crossed the tracks when the regular goods train from Maffra and Hayfield barreled through the station. They didn't make it to the platform. Their journey cut short. The station is haunted, not only with these spirits but others. Odd occurrences happen. The first, a bull escaped or was helped out of the cattle yards near the train tracks. When it was loose, it decided to barrel down and charge a train, causing minor damage. and derailing some of the trucks. The next occurrence was one winter night in 1903, where no other accounts of wind damage are reported. 2 full trucks in the siding move out onto the track over 2/3 of a kilometre. At 6 in the morning, with the sun preparing to rise, a dense cloud and drizzle blanketed the countryside. As a result, Gavin, the train driver, wasn't going as fast as he would. When he saw the trucks at the last minute, he was thrown into a wall as he threw on the brakes. The fireman fell into the boiler, getting a nasty burn. The old railway station standing in the yard has been converted into an art gallery for local artists. There are definitely spirits attached to the train yard. Another interesting fact about the railway station, it has a basement, or you could call it a dungeon for storing the milk or dead. There is an unusual place. There is a little grave in the centre of town. It's an unusual place for a little grave in a car park, in the middle of the Traralgon business district near the train line. In 1864, it looked a lot different. There were willows planted and a tree where Repco is standing today. That was at the head of the white picket fence. By 1912, people couldn't remember who was buried here. It was the source of much mystery. There's a story told to a local journalist. A man recounted a man named Fletcher, who lived at the gatehouse near a grave, who had a child pass away shortly after childbirth. The journalist tried to fact-check this and could not find anyone with that name. Other accounts say this is the site of a policeman's child, Mary Ann Smythe. A report I read said she was about 2 years old playing along the Traralgon Creek. Other accounts say she died a few days after birth. Digging in, I researched this family and found Mary Ann was born in Richmond in 1863. Her death certificate is dated the same year.
Mary Ann's family lived in Traralgon since 1858. Her father was the constable. He'd been posted there for that entire time. They'd lost a number of children already, who probably share that burial site with their sister, Mary Ann.
It appears Mary Ann is at rest here. However, there were 11 other people buried here. They were moved to the Traralgon Cemetery, the one the locals are familiar with today. This move was necessitated by to the train line, as they built train lines extensions out to Glengarry, Hayfield and Maffra. Mary Ann was left at the request of her father, the local constable. He was one of the constables who dealt with the Shady Creek murder, which Patreons will be able to hear on patreon.com/Haunted Hills. Are there some people who have a mission that keeps their spirits busy after death? A place that is not at rest is the site of where a doctor interested in psychiatry or had lived or worked on the corner of Breed and K Street. It's an office block in the first suite. This was experienced while a counselling organisation were tenants. They felt his watchful eye over their operations. Only nobody knew, and originally they thought they had a particularly ditzy receptionist. The receptionist who worked here kept getting in trouble for leaving the answering machine off, the heater on or the air conditioner, the filing cabinets unlocked and the computer on. She swore black and blue that she switched on the answering machine, locked the filing cabinet, turned off the heater or AC, and switched off the computer. She was so upset that she asked her co-workers to watch her close up. They watched her and witnessed her close everything as she should. The next day they entered together and it was open. Everything was reversed that they'd done the night before, and they were the first in the office. A receptionist and counsellor were sitting at the front reception desk one day. When the door opened, the bell chimed. Footsteps walked up to the counter. They looked over the counter and no one was there. They thought a child might have come in ahead of their parent, that they didn't see open the door, and they didn't see behind the counter. Although Nobody had left the way they came. No one was there. Every afternoon at the same time, rearranging the storage cupboard. Only no one was. Counsellors would check if a client had gotten lost on the way out. They never had. They asked the business in Suite 2. When they went around there, they realised instantly that the business in Suite 2 could not be making the noise unless they physically banged against the wall of their own suite. Which, who would do that? The receptionist there was just as perplexed as they were and said that they thought the noise was them. This was unnerving for both of the businesses. One afternoon, one of the counsellors came out of her office and nearly walked into the back of a man. She stopped short of the short, plump man in his early 60s. The hallway lights shining on his balding head. He was wearing a checkered shirt and white moleskin pants. He disappeared. The counsellor checked with the front desk about the man who came down the hallway. They said they hadn't seen anyone, nor had anyone else come into the office who looked like that. She also checked with the other counsellors, and even in that back room, and could not find him. There is a twist to that story. The counselling organisation moved buildings. They would have thought their ghostly tales had come to an end. The new building was seriously glitchy, and doesn't seem to like the businesses in the building. Spirits tend to feed off the energy of a place. Counselling organisations experience a gamut of energy. The souls in the new location were more restless. They affected the electricity, pushed things off desks, became really oppressive to the point the building is regularly smudged, cleansed of restless phantoms, with sage and ritual. It is believed this building is built on a massacre site. Traralgon had several hospitals in the early days, however most of them were private, like we learned in Traralgon history. In the 1950s, the hospital that's no longer standing, well, parts of it do, but it is at the location of the fire station on Princess Highway, Traralgon, or Argyle Street. At that location is where another full apparition was seen. A motorcyclist riding towards Ballara late at night rounded a corner hitting a wombat. A passing motorist found her and got help. The ambulance came and took her to the Traralgon Hospital. She was lying waiting for the anaesthetist when a doctor came through the door that no one else used. Coming by the bed, he spoke to her and her husband, giving them advice and reassurance. He talked to the nurses and then disappeared. Although the patient said he made them feel reassured and that everything was going to be okay. Even though the damage to her body was extensive and she looked severely damaged, the doctors had been concerned about the health of her internal organs. She believes that doctor inspired her to survive and get through the difficulties and rehabilitation in the coming months. She wanted to thank him, asking around about him. The other nurses and doctors don't remember this doctor at all. It was as though he didn't exist. The operation and subsequent operations worked, and the lady and her husband were reassured, if not a little bewildered, at the doctor's appearance and disappearance. While this doctor was amazing and supportive in the afterlife, not all doctors have been good while alive. One has led to a haunting in Shakespeare Street, Traralgon. There is no longer a home standing on the location. It's the corner of Shakespeare Street and Highland Highway. At 27 years old, Mary lived with her parents in 1911. However, she wanted to visit her aunt in Traralgon. A male friend loaned her the money to take the train to make the visit. She ended the trip early with her aunt. Her parents believed she was still there. when she booked a hotel in Melbourne and prepared for an appointment with Dr. Peacock. While her male friend visited her at the hotel the night before the operation and said Mary was doing well and ready for the surgery the next day, he visited her the day of the procedure and saw her in a bed at the doctor's house. The friend didn't think she looked well. He mentioned this to the doctor and the man who still held on to her belongings at the hotel. She and this man were likely in an intimate relationship, and they had become pregnant. However, for some reason, they were not able to keep the baby, engaging the services of a doctor. However, this time, the procedure did not go according to plan. Mary died and her body was never found. While her death was likely an accident, in 1911, with abortion being a crime that tarnishes reputations of doctors, he made the ill-fated decision to cause her body to disappear. As a result, he was charged with willful murder. In the first trial, he said she had suffered from puerperal fever and left his property alive and well. This story came unstuck when they searched his farm in Carrum, 33 kilometres from Melbourne on the Mornington Peninsula. This is where they found her things burned at the property. Meanwhile, her Nellie Stewart bangle, wedding ring, and gold brooch were also found in his possession. The government put up a reward for £200. Nerd note: the wedding ring must be a family heirloom because Mary is unmarried and listed as a single woman, which widow or divorcee would be the list for her death certificate. There were 3 court cases for Dr. Peacock, and the last court case in February 1912 acquitted him. The jury found him not guilty after 4.5 hours. The result, along with no one wanting to make an honest woman of her, may have caused Mary to have trust issues. Everyone who places their health and lives in the hands of a doctor should know that their life or death will be treated with respect. Of course she had trust issues. Her body was never found, and her spirit went back to her aunt's house. It's unknown if her aunt experienced her afterlife existence. Her auntie eventually passed away and the property was sold. Over time, her mistrust of men grew, to the point she would make her presence known only to men. Those men who were willing to admit having experienced her said they felt her sit on the bed, not wanting them there at all. They felt so unwelcome that they would leave before morning. No woman experienced this, and her presence was unnoticed to them. Many people moved into the house, and she never liked it when men were there. In a house on Franklin Street, there is a room where the residents are not welcome. There is a rocking chair in there, and it rocks all alone. The room is cold despite the temperature of the rest of the house. The chair creaks. Disapproval emanates from the room. Late at night, they see a nightie-clad woman walking the hallway, like a matron, ensuring the residents are sleeping. She has flowing grey hair that streams behind her as she marches the hallway. I know when I say ghost children, some of you will instantly think of the creepy children depicted in the movies. But for some reason, Traralgon's ghost children are filled with laughter. The residents of a house opposite the Grey Street School told me they had no children. But the house would sometimes trill with the laughter of a child. Her footsteps in shadow are sometimes seen running down the hallway into the wall in the kitchen. It's likely the house has been renovated since she was alive. She loves her existence, staying up late with no one to tell her what to do. I wonder if this is all the residents' experiences, or just those who she likes. I wonder how she would behave with residents she didn't like. A man in a new estate in Traralgon was awoken by someone slapping him gently and giggling. He awoke and saw a curly-haired blonde boy staring at him. The 5-year-old walked from beside the bed into the closet. The man jumped up and followed him, expecting to find a little boy with bright blue eyes. However, no one was in the closet. The man felt spooked. He checked the lock on his bedroom door. It was locked tight. He got back in bed. Now having great difficulty falling asleep. He was watching the door and the closet, contemplating what had happened. When the door unlocked, the doorknob turned. The door opened, a crack of light shone across his eyes. A giggle wafted through, and it clicked, locked again. Maybe the children have discovered the fountain of youth is to stay young eternally as a spirit. It also makes me wonder how they stay so happy. Tassie's Hill in Traralgon South was a source of bewilderment for the Traralgon Shire. The people living out there wanted a road put through the hills. That seemed like a relatively straightforward and simple request. The Shire thought so too, and at first started making preparations. They finally found the money they could allocate. This took longer than they were used to. The surveyors found the work incredibly tricky, and it took much longer than it was supposed to. At every stage, things went wrong. The Shire considered a vexatious spirit was keeping them from building the road. That's an interesting story. Tassie's Hill is a place where people feel watched today, and some have had UFO sightings out there. Maybe there was a spirit trying to protect the land and stopping them from building into it. In a laneway behind Franklin Street was the site of the Star Hotel, different to the other Star Hotel, and a Masonic lodge. Orbs were caught on camera here. The only issue was this location for 15 years burnt down. They even rebuilt it in brick only to discover heat explodes them. This happened with such frequency, it was commonly known as the wooden stump. Why would a spirit do such a thing? Do you think some spirits continue on with the lives they had when they were alive? The original facade of St. James Church of England was pulled down and replaced with shops. This is at the corner of Seymour Street and Church Street. One of the shops on Seymour Street was a video shop that had a room out the back where a presence was felt. It was a shadowy figure moving through the room, writing, standing, practicing speaking. On an occasion, some young boys snuck out the back, only to quickly return terrified and confess to the video shop attendant. They told her someone was in the back of the shop. On an occasion, some young boys snuck out to the back of the shop. They saw papers rustle. They thought at first they'd caused them in their haste to enter. Only they stood very still and watched as a figure moved across the room and touched other papers. That's it. They were out of there. They returned terrified and confessed to the video shop attendant that someone was in the back of the shop. She said to them, "Yep, he's been there for a while. He is the priest." Another participant who came along a tour with me informed that he used to work at that location when it was a Coles store. The pallets would move while no one else was working, placed in odd spots. The staff room was empty because it had an ominous, oppressive feeling, as though a spirit was present. The oldest building that actually still exists and is able to be visited in Traralgon is the Star Hotel. And attached to the building remains a spirit. In photos, there are orbs and an apparition. Starting. Helen, the 32-year-old licensee of the Star Hotel, she took it over the year before her death while pregnant. The birth was a particularly difficult one for her. Her 5th child was born at the expense of her insides, leading to complications of peritonitis. It seems she has big plans for the place and loved it past her very end. She doesn't affect the operation of the restaurant, and it's as though she loves the place, being used and lively. That's just how she wanted it to be. The owner, who works 70 hours a week, hasn't noticed her, but maybe she helps him work those insane hours. Maybe Helen also found the ghost of the child who died after being poisoned by someone she trusted and wanted to mother her while loving the hotel. In her death, she stays caring for the property and child. A comforting presence. She doesn't need to appear as often because she's not lonely. At another hotel in Traralgon, constantly for sale, they say it's haunted. Nobody keeps it for long. It has a reputation for handsy patrons, but maybe they're not patrons and it's the ghosts that haunt this premises. An employee had heard of the legend of a man they called George haunting the hotel. It was said his heart broke from the loss of his fiancée, who passed away from ill health. He decided he couldn't live on without her, and decided to take drastic measures to be reunited with her. One night he took a rope and his life. Unfortunately, he is now trapped in the hotel. His goals have not changed. He is still seeking his fiancée. He reveals himself to the women in the hotel in hopes of finding a wife. Is said to have caused full body chills. It is always cold, and as though somebody is watching you. Even just walking past, it is as though the presence leans against the door jamb, their eyes eagerly tracing the contour of bodies passing by. One night this employee was outside changing over the beer kegs, beside the old wooden staircase leading up to the hallway containing that room. As she came out, she glanced up, not knowing why. However, met the gaze of an apparition of the man exactly described by the others who had seen him, wearing work clothes, the same hat, floating up the stairwell. The second oldest building still standing in Traralgon is the post office and adjoining courthouse. There have been some odd experiences there, and ever since the man died who used to maintain the clocks, strange things have happened. The clock stops and starts with no rhyme and reason. One night we were on the corner of Franklin and K Street. I was telling the historical stories, including a time a juror passed away of natural causes during a trial. His presence was said to be felt in the courthouse the next day. It was 8:45 p.m. on the clock face of the post office and our phones. Yet the clock struck 9 times, as though the clock read 9 p.m. Another courthouse ghost story. Justice Holroyd of Central Criminal Court had a case whereby a juror had not attended under his civic duty on 23 September 1886. The judge imposed a fine. On Tuesday, 28 September 1886, a friend of the juror appeared in court, asking for the fine to be dropped, due to his friend having passed away in February 1886. The judge agreed he would drop the fine. That was a valid reason for a juror not appearing. Though I wonder if the spirit of the man found this an amusing predicament and stuck around to witness the shenanigans. He's never seen a ghost before, doesn't believe in them, and hasn't seen one since. He was driving down Hyde Park Road and Henry Street. It was foggy, a man in a dark green olive coat, like the one Australian service personnel wear, walked out in front of him, seeming to appear out of nowhere. But it was foggy. Maybe he was just crossing the street. He slammed on the brakes to avoid hitting him. To no avail, he watched with horror as he hit the pedestrian. However, he did not hear a thump or feel a bump. He got out of the car, tracing back where his tires had just been. Nobody was there. He walked back to the car, and back again, down the road, further this time investigating. He even checked the sidewalk, and in front of the car in case he had been launched forward. There was nobody lying on the ground, no marks on the front of the car, not a scent of blood. He thought maybe the body was further back. He kept walking. The vividness of the man he had seen and hit with his car haunted him as he searched the road. Mist was all he found. He trekked back and forward on that road. The only conclusion he came to was that he hit a man who died long ago and had had his first experience with a spirit. Several Traralgon men left for war and did not return. Maybe their souls found their way back to the town they loved. When he finally got to work, his fellow workers said it looked like he'd seen a ghost. It was years before he told them that he had. This was his only experience with a spirit. Thank you for your ears, dear listeners. I hope the Traralgon ghost stories have given you a greater understanding of the mysteries of this area, or the chills you've been looking for. Tell us if you've had the nerve to listen on location. If you like to, you can check out hauntedhillstours.com.au. You can find the details to undertake a self-guided tour. If you want to support the podcast or get early access, ad-free and participate, you can sign up on Patreon, patreon.com/hauntedhills. Or you can help us by writing a review. Reviews help us grow and continue sharing these stories with more people. If you like this, please share it with your friends. You can also follow us on Facebook, Haunted Hills Pod, Twitter, haunt_hills, or Instagram, Haunted Hills Tours Gippsland. This podcast was produced, researched, written and narrated by me, Tegan Dawson, on Gunno Kurnay land in Moe, Victoria, never ceded. Introduction and outro music by Aaron Austin Music. Next time on Haunted Hills, we'll be telling the history of an old company town called Yallourn, Victoria. It is a ghost town. It no longer exists today. It is mostly in the mine. That small town has big stories. Be kind and thoughtful, stay safe and healthy.